Welcome back, everyone, to the Natty 19 podcast. I'm Jonathan Marshall, and I'm sitting at the table with the amazing Natty 19 crew. That's Chuck, Swain, K-Way, and Christy Lee. We had a whole lot happen last week, much like every week. And we're going to jump back into Chult here, but first, I want to say thank you again for listening, and thank you to our Patreon supporters. Reports are coming in from those who got their fresh Natty 19 swag in the mail. This is good. I don't really have much else to say. I'm excited about tonight's episode, so I want to get into this. Hit the music. We got a show to do. Natty 19, episode 69. Coming in hot.
You've been waiting over a year to do that, haven't you?
Come on, we couldn't just let it go without any kind of mention.
All right, recap.
Forgive my slurp there.
That's what she said.
That's what she said. Episode 69. Excuse my slurp.
Is that the title of our episode?
Slurp is right up there with panties. It just sounds.
Oh no, the name of this episode is Copernicus.
I was
gets
gonna
a
make
new
a
magic
joke
sword.
about. I was gonna make a joke about my tea bag too, but nothing came to mind.
No way. Your challenge as a DM is to make that episode title stick. You got to make it relevant.
Recap. So, you guys left Omu via a magic circle on the southern edge of the city. Orvex, Riga, and Svitlongi stayed behind with the cubes, fearing that the cubes would return to their respected shrines if taken from the city vicinity, right? You escorted Dyrax and the mortally wounded Zagmira back to the heart of Uptau, and that's where you found Valindra. And from her, you learn, or rather, she confirms what you already most likely assumed. The Tomb of the Nine Gods, according to her research into its creator, will indefinitely host a myriad of dangers, including diabolical traps and denizens of the not-so-friendly type.
Nice, my kind of party.
You all agreed that porting back to Nyanzaru to resupply would be best, and Valindra said that she'd wait for your return in Omu, which was kind of put you guys off. Yes, she insisted that she enter the tomb alongside you, fearing that you'd fail on your own. I gotta say, as the DM, I'm with her on that. So from there, you returned. This is kind of a fast recap because I want to get into the episode here tonight. So from there, you returned to a much different Port Nyanzaru, one that was teeming with adventurers and prosperity. You learned that your exploits throughout Chult has had a large impact on the success of the 3 Seas shipping and freight. They had expanded, hired on more adventurers. They've got a quest board up full of requests. Daniel Devitas informs you that Alarad had arrived in town with a companion. You went to meet with him at Wakanga's villa, where you learn that Sindra Sylvain, your benefactor, is at death's door. The death curse is catching up with her. You guys took too long. What can I say?
That's sad.
Master Triss has a surprise appearance. That was Quincy's tutor, mentor, and friend from his childhood. And he shares with you a bombshell of information. He explains the story behind the Krugean Sphere and Sibylla and the role that they all played in saving the city of Mesero from the forces of Rosna Sea. You remember that?
I do.
And he explains his plan to reassemble the sphere and free Sibylla from her prison. And he seems, anyway, to have the support and respect of all who were present in that room. Wakanga, Syndra, grandfather Zatembi was on board. These are big names in the scheme of things, right? We're going to pick things up here. 20 Hammer, sunset. Zatembi stands over a podium-like workbench, calmly poring over a book through thin slit spectacles. The flame from a half-burnt candle lights his area as Master Triss puts the finishing touches on the large arcane circle drawn in the center of the massive hall. Wakanga stands up in the upper level, watching down from the shadows alongside several of the other merchant princes of Nyanzaru who came to, something of import is about to happen in the Temple of Savras, and they cleared their agendas to witness the event. It's clearly a big deal. Anit walks in with a thick wooden bowl in her arms. Moving slowly so as not to spill its contents, she places it next to a cushioned bed in a small chamber adjacent to this hall. Bits of herbs floating along the bowl's surface bob and weave with each step she takes. Also on the table near the bed, lilacs sit in a vase of water.
Lilacs?
Mm-hmm.
That's familiar.
After pouring the last of the salt, closing the circle, Triss stands and turns towards Zatembi. Have you prepared your incantations, old friend? And from the dusty tome, Zatembi shakes his head in slight frustration. These are no easy passages, young Triss. To perform this ritual safely, I would require several months at least. You have given me almost a full day. Master Triss calmly moves closer to Zatembi, and you can barely make out what he says. Old friend, as I said, you do not need to do this if you feel it is unsafe. You have done much for me already, and I am forever in your debt. Zatembi lets loose a deep sigh. I am ready as I'll ever be, young Triss. Let us begin. The 3 pieces of the Krugean Sphere rest on the floor in the center of the circle. Master Triss standing a good 5 feet away from them, fearing that his being any closer would disrupt the process. He turns to your group, who, up until this point, has been watching in silence as everyone else did their part. Once the pieces are reassembled, there will be a brief moment when a bridge is drawn between our plane and that of the Shadowfell. There are numerous defenses in place that should keep things from getting out of hand, though in such rare occurrence I would ask that you be ready. Just on the other side of this rift are countless creatures born of darkness who would do anything to feel the light of our world, even if only for a moment. And once we begin, there is only one way out, and that is to move forward. Master Hart, while I am confident that with Zatembi and Anit's guidance, coupled with Irame's unique gift, we would find and summon Sibylla, I believe your ties to the creature would hasten the process. When the time comes, will you help bring her, Copernicus? And he holds out his hand to you in a handshake fashion that's reminiscent of how a dock worker would ask a favor.
Copernicus will grab his hand and say, "Of course, Master Triss. You'll have my full cooperation."
He nods to you. Thank you, my friend. Let us begin. Zatembi, would you be so kind as to open the circle? Anit, my dear, stand ready to reassemble the sphere as I showed you prior. And now Zatembi begins reciting the incantation, and Triss stands with his arms out and his eyes closed as he enters into a trance-like state.
Nosferatu, inote. Fucking Bruce Campbell.
After a few moments, Zavril, the hair on your arms and neck stand in familiar discomfort, and a cold wind begins to blow.
Shudder.
So, things are moving quick. Let me just pause for a second and get a grasp. Let's paint a picture
Yeah,
here.
I'd like to know the stances in the room.
We're going to paint a picture here. You guys are... This scene takes place in the Temple of Savras. That's where Zatembi and Anit are the most comfortable performing such a ritual.
I feel like we gotta shut the lights off for this one.
Candles are lit over there. Bring them over if you want.
Master Triss had everyone's kind of doing they're kind of doing their part, right? Not everyone, but the key people that are performing this ritual. You got Zatembi, who is poring over these incantations, reciting them over and over again in his head in preparation. You've got Triss, who's in the center of the chamber, drawing this circle in salt, much like Copernicus. You're familiar with what he's doing, right?
Yeah.
You've got Anit, who she clearly has a job to do. As Triss had mentioned, reassembling the Krugean Sphere. It's a big job for Anit, but clearly they must have gone over it. She also prepared a bed, with a vase next to it with lilacs, a familiar... Copernicus, you could probably put two and two together and kind of draw a conclusion there with that as well. And also maybe take note that there's something more to the lilac and why you have discovered it as a preferred. As I mentioned, I think on episode 17.
Something that makes Sybil feel comfortable coming forward.
Yeah, you find that she's
Right.
a little more manageable when there's the scent of lilac in the air, and now you might actually kind of understand why. It could be her familiarity, reminding her of her relationship with Master Triss. So that's kind of
Interesting, yeah.
might be connecting it with Copernicus there.
I feel like there'd be a moment where Copernicus and Zavril would kind of lock eyes with each other.
Yep. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, most certainly. And that's kind of where where the scene is taking place, in case that kind of got brushed over.
And this chamber, is this back at Zatembe's church? Or is this a different place?
It is in the temple, yeah, the Temple of Savras, where you guys had poured it in. It's one of the largest buildings in Port Nyanzaru. And of course you've got, not all, but a handful of the merchant princes as well present, watching from above. You wouldn't even know they were there. They're so out of the way, trying not to be, they're trying not to get in the way, but they want to be present to watch this. They have a vested interest in this, and certainly they don't want things getting out of control.
And I picture they have it blocked off from the general public right now.
Oh yeah, the temple's closed for the evening. Yeah, the temple's certainly closed for the evening. Now, Zatembi began the incantations. The process has begun. A light wind begins to manifest now within the chamber, and what begins as a slight breeze, seemingly to originate from the center of the circle, gradually builds and builds, spiraling outward, causing the candles to flicker and dance wildly. A large cracking sound booms, causing you to flinch involuntarily, and loose papers in the room now are getting swept up into the vortex, bringing with it a stale odor like that of an ancient mausoleum being cracked open for the first time in centuries. A periodic snapping sound accompanied by a dull rumble makes it nearly impossible to hear anything. It's at this point Triss opens his eyes and snaps his attention to Anit. "Now, Anit!" he yells. It's so loud now. I'm picturing the end of Poltergeist with the rope scene there, where they're right next to each other, but they're shouting. I thought you said not to go into the light. And Anit, standing firm through squinting eyes, flings her arms out before her, and you see the 3 shards of the Krugean Sphere begin to lift off the ground. Triss now turns to you, Copernicus. Master Heart, the Sibyl you know senses my presence. It will not come willingly. You must call to her. The rest of you be ready. She is not the only one who will answer his calling.
So then Copernicus will reach down inside himself and he'll summon up his packed weapon. He brings it forward. It appears hovering in front of him. He's not even holding it. Like I picture with all the magic and the vortex in the room, it just kind of appears before him.
Yeah.
And, Sybil, show yourself.
Quincy is gripping his rapier hilt very uneasily. He's wondering if he was right all along about Sybil. And even though he caught glimpses of the past and what Sybil came from or who she once was, he's still not entirely sure he trusts what's going on.
Very cool. Where's Irme sit with all
Irme is
this?
actually surprisingly calm. She's very focused on every single element going the right way right now. Her eyes just dart around the room at what everybody's doing, but she's very calm. She's almost, there's almost something natural about the moving between worlds to her.
All right. Very good. Zaves, do you, as this is building up, now this is clearly happening. Now you know all about the Shadowfell. You know what lurks beyond. What is Averill thinking about this ritual, and what are you doing in terms of mental preparation and, and such?
Yeah, and Quincy is definitely looking at Zavriel as the only sane person in the room at this point.
Irme looks strangely comfortable, and everybody else is participating.
Yes. With everything going on, with stuff getting louder, with the smell hitting Zabriel, his first instinct is really to make certain that his back's more towards a wall and, taking like a step back, kind of, so nothing can come from behind him.
Yeah, I imagine Zavriel's like white-knuckled grip on his whips.
Right, exactly. And then the entire time, while he's not so much focusing on Triss and Anit doing the summoning, he is paying attention to where it's happening and then looking back and forth between Copernicus and the ritual itself.
Now, Copernicus, as you say this, the area around the circle begins to bend and contort as the rift opens, and within the center of the chamber, dull gray stones erect from the floor, and peering into the center you can make out a tortured landscape void of light and color. Triss immediately snaps his attention to you, Irme. Irme, break your gaze! Do not stare into the rift for long! But it's too late. Irme, in your comfort, give me a will save.
Oh, told you this was no good.
This was a bad idea.
Yeah, I feel
I'm
like when
blaming
that
Cappy.
when that rift opened, Copernicus flinches for just a second and then will snatch his packed weapon out of the air.
I'm sorry, what's a will save?
Oh, I'm sorry. Make a wisdom save.
Okay. I was like, I don't have
It's old. It's old school. Old habits die hard.
That is a word I have not heard in a long time.
It's
good.
mid school.
It's mid-school.
Quincy, I will say this: being near enough to her and hearing Triss say that, you can react to give her an advantage. You're close to her. You hear Triss say, shout to her, and then you're kind of making this weird connection in your head.
Yeah,
Like,
one hand still on his rapier, with the other one he'll try to grab Irme by the arm, try to grab her attention.
All right, you that gives you an advantage on the roll.
That's not good.
Irme is feeling almost like in her chest, that feeling you get when you stand on the edge of a cliff and you look down and it almost feels like it's tugging at you. Right from your center.
15. even though Irame had was able to resist whatever was happening, Irame, you definitely feel some staring out into that twisted, colorless landscape. There was definitely something that was happening to you inside. You snapped to find Quincy had shoved you out of the way and just kind of snapped you awake a little bit to break your gaze. And
I feel like Quincy partly did that to make sure that he could grab onto something, that it was real as well, for himself.
Maybe when
Only with one hand, that other hand still gripping his...
While staring into that barren, horrible landscape, she sees flashes of herself doing things under the pressure of solving the death curse, like dealing the necrotic damage to Bag of Nails and being distrustful of Orvex and distrustful of the Red Wizards, and even think when she thought about betraying Svitlangi to gain favor with Rosnasi. She's thinking about all those things that normally would have never really crossed her mind to do.
I like it.
Does the party know about your Fey ancestry, or is that something we know out of character?
No, I think it's a given. Everybody kind of knows at least to some extent, the history of elves in general, and I think that unless you're a country bumpkin, right? Then
yeah.
So but there was something specific about Irame's family, right? Or is it just all elves?
There is a specific incident that brings Irame a bit closer to the Feywild than elves, but elves...
Right, so do our characters know about this, or was that something that just us at the table knows?
I can't remember if it's come up or not, to be honest.
I think Quincy, whether or not he knows specifically about Irame's family's particular connection to the Feywild, I think knowing a little bit about the past and Master Triss's relationship with Sybil, and Master Triss's relationship with the Feywild, and him having been taught some Fey magic, that he's wondering why Irame is singled out amongst the rest of the group.
Yeah, there's
he did
also
note that.
Sure, yeah.
In Irame telling the story of why she ended up with the glasses and the chalice and everything, I think it was discussed there. A little bit of how she became a wild mage was because Confessions in the Jungle, because her magic actually derived directly from the Feywild.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if this has something, if it's the reason why Irame was singled out. This is just speculation. This is table talk. This is not in character, but Quincy would definitely be wondering as well if this has something to do with the Feywild, Fey magic. If somehow this magic
and Simber, the Fey dragon,
that's right,
is Sibelia's familiar.
Yep, that's right.
That you spoke to,
and I could communicate with him, and all those other fun things. Irame also picks up on the weaves around people a lot, the magic weave.
And after you spoke to the dragon in Fey, you spoke in Fey, so you both knew.
That's right. Yeah, good memory. That's right.
On the
I've
river.
been trying to say that for 5 minutes. You guys, every time I went to speak, fucking cut me off.
So I think it's all come out in kind of bits and pieces.
Yeah, well, as most things do while journeying through Chelt. No, very good. Yeah, there's a lot of
inspiration.
Yeah,
I think I already have one.
Oh.
Trickle down economics. I'm right.
Wait. Maybe Svitlangi had one. Does Quincy get one?
I am living proof that there's trickle down inspiration does not work.
Trickle down expiration.
What are you talking about?
Yeah. I'll give Quincy an inspiration.
All right, I'll mark that down.
Yeah, very good. You certainly you made that connection. Now, at this, that you guys resolved that incident, and just for the fun of it, Irame, if you had failed that saving throw, I was going to have you roll on the Wild Surge table as like your magic's defense mechanism to being so close to the Shadowfell.
Oh Jesus!
Fireball the whole room.
Yeah. Possibly, or you just could have went invisible.
Or I could have turned fucking
Turn
Copernicus into a potted plant.
Okay, so now at this, you hear omnidirectional whispers, and you see movement in the darkness around the circle. And black mist swirls sporadically as shapes begin to take form. Shadowy creatures of medium size with elongated arms, hands that come to a singular sharp point. They begin to lunge at Triss while he's performing these incantations. And as they're lunging at him, you see them just bouncing off this invisible protective barrier and bursting into blue flames. Copernicus, you, out of everybody that you know of, well, at a game, Copernicus, you are the only one who can actually see with absolute clarity into the rift. And among the hundreds of these creatures that you can see out into the darkness, these creatures, hundreds of them, are swarming towards the circle, and out there amongst, it's like looking into an ant mound, right? And amongst it, you see Sybil standing out there as these creatures just rush past her. She's just standing there motionless.
So yeah, Copernicus grabs his packed weapon and focuses to ground himself and calm himself. And he says, Master Triss, what are you doing? Let's do it fast.
Yeah, no, at this point, Triss is still kind of, he you're not even sure if he had heard you, because his eyes are kind of rolled back up into his head, and his arms are stretched out to the sky, and he's just reciting this unknown language over and over again. Sounds like he's repeating the same phrase.
Irme's gonna scream to Copernicus, call to her, call to Sybil.
And these creatures are just bursting into flames and more. It's like, I'm thinking like a bug light at camp, at summer camp. Only a little bit more.
So yeah, Cappy will he'll reach forward and project out. At first he'll say Sybil. He'll call her by the name he knows her as, and then he'll try Sibylla. Now at this point, the circle is being bombarded by these shadow creatures, and Triss begins shouting he continues shouting these incantations, and the pieces of the Krugean Sphere reach their height because Anit was lifting them. Now you see Anit, she's standing a good 15-20 feet away from inside the circle, and you see her arms are stretched out before her, and she's like force lifting these pieces up, and her robes are just whipping around her in the wind. And it's actually a sight to see this young cleric, just controlling such power. And she's lifting these pieces up. And then as they reach, let's call it 15 feet off the ground, the three shards close tightly together. And then all goes silent instantly. And a blinding flash bursts outward. And the ringing in your ears, it's all just blinds you completely. Can't see anything. It was so bright. And you can't hear anything except for the ringing sound. And when your senses finally begin to return, you can see an elven woman, or apparently an elven woman, laying motionless on the ground in the center of that circle. And all of you now, as far as you can see into the rift now, you can see it's like semi-lit, as that flash kind of rolls through the environment. And as it passes, you just see hundreds and hundreds of these little blue flames as these creatures are just kind of piled up on top of each other, burnt to a crisp. Some of them still on fire as the blue flames are dying out. And then the darkness returns as the light fades out into the distance. It was just like a massive wave that just bursted out from that circle, from the Krugean Sphere, honestly. I mean, that much is obvious enough. And then at this, the rift
slowly begins to close. And meanwhile, the ringing is slowly starting to die out, and the wind begins to die out, and the papers just kind of give like one last kind of whip around the room before settling on the floor or wherever they settle. You can see now, as the rift comes to a complete close, there's still jagged stones that remain half melded in the temple floor and walls. Severed, shadowy limbs smoldering on the floor where they started to kind of pile up, and some were starting to get through, and then when the rift closed, like an arm got burnt off and fell to the ground. And where the arms were cut, you see there's kind of blue flames that are dying out. And then above the woman that's laying motionless on the floor, you can see a thin longsword, as black as night, hangs motionless in the air. Triss immediately rushes to collect the woman in his arms and brings her to the bed that Anit had prepared.
Copernicus runs over to help him.
So Copernicus, as you rush over to help Master Triss. You get him up to his feet with Sibylla in his arms. You see that she's pale, and beads of sweat are forming all over her skin. And then you just stop for a moment as that blade beckons you. And you're
Episode 69, Copernicus gets a magic sword.
And you're staring at this
in
floating
his mouth.
He'll take it any way you can get it, baby. Cappy reaches up for this thing. His main drow finger stretching out so far.
You're staring at this floating blade, and a series of images floods your mind. Ooh. Images of your wife getting cut down, and then her hazy image being held in a cell constructed of bone, and she's surrounded by countless other lost souls consumed with grief. All of them sit motionless, just waiting. But waiting for what, though? The image then zooms out, and you can see one of the spirits, one of thousands of these spirits. One of them silently lifts up from the rest by some unseen force, and then begins floating towards a black void. And eventually, as the soul gets further and further into the black, a gigantic maw opens from the darkness, emitting a dull red glow through jagged, elongated, pointed teeth. And it swallows the lost soul with ease.
What the fuck?
And when the image fades, the black sword is in your grasp.
I feel like you guys would have seen Cappy miming this out. Like he grabs the sword and he starts kind of like wandering across the room, like he's looking somewhere else. And then when that maw thing happens, he just flinches and falls back to the ground screaming. And then he kind of comes to, and he's holding the blade, then looking up at the rest of you, looking at him.
Irame's looking to Copernicus on the floor, but her eyes are blurred and like they hurt. They're in pain, and she's moved her glasses away from her face. She's rubbing her eyes, and she's remembering the flash of light that damaged her eyesight in the first place. And when her vision finally clears, she goes to help Copernicus up from the ground.
I want to study Master Triss's face. I want to study what's going on with Sibylla and Master Triss. I want to see what this is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking at him, you see that he actually he's wearing expressions that you would expect from anyone who is just now being reunited for the first time in 100 years with the person that they love, and under such dire circumstances as the woman it hasn't come to yet. But you can definitely see on his face it's not a surprise to him. It's something that he expected, but it still pains him so to see her in such conditions. But at the same time, there's an incredible amount of joy that at least it's almost like he had accomplished something that has been in the works for so long, and something that he certainly couldn't accomplish on his own, as he's dabbing her forehead with a wet cloth and just kind of whispering to her, kissing her forehead repeatedly, and maybe you hear him mumbling, thank you, just over and over again as he's going through these steps.
I want to approach him, and I want to softly put my hand upon his shoulder, but my eyes, in contrast to my touch, are going to be a little bit colder, more withdrawn, and I'm just going to say, Master Triss, if you had just requested this task of me, I would have done this for you. There would be no need for such manipulations.
He holds Sibelia's hand still, and he sits down. You see he's physically drained too now that the adrenaline is starting to kind of wear off. It's almost like your words had kind of brought him back into reality a bit, and with that comes exhaustion. And he just kind of almost just collapses into the seat next to the bed, but he's still white-knuckled, grasping Sibelia's hand. Through tired eyes, he looks to you and he says, Quincy, my friend, I cannot thank you enough for all that you have done, but you must understand, I wanted to tell you, and it wasn't that I could not trust you, no. I wasn't sure of a lot, Quincy, and the amount of information surrounding the entirety of the situation, I couldn't be sure if the entity would pick up on it and know that I was so close.
Well, I am pleased that it worked out for you. I do not know where we go from here.
There is much to do. If we are to end this death curse, finally, once and for all.
Quincy just looks over at Copernicus now.
So yeah, he's being helped up by Irame.
Seems like all his friends are, I don't know, something other than maybe when he first met them, other than how he perceived them.
Mm-hmm.
I got, Irame definitely had a strange emotion during it all, almost in a way that we've spent all this time getting to know each other. But everything felt so fateful that it almost made her friends feel like strangers in a way. I know that sounds odd, and that's maybe not the correct phrasing, but more like the relationships we built were made to happen and weren't by our own choosing. And that just gives a foreign feeling to her and the feeling she has for each one of her compatriots.
Maybe a little more artificial or directed as opposed to organic.
A little bit more directed, and it definitely doesn't make her feel distant from them in any way, but it definitely makes her feel, I don't know, uncomfortable maybe for a moment.
Maybe, yeah, especially because it was your doing that kind of involuntarily made it happen.
It dawned upon her when Quincy said to Master Triss, "You could have just asked me," she thought to herself. But maybe this was all the way that it was supposed to happen, and it wouldn't have worked any other way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as Cappy's being helped up, he looks sheepish. He looks at Zavril and then looks at Quincy and Irame, and he's just kind of embarrassed by, his outburst there and then being helped up, and he'll try to brush it off and then approach Triss and Sibylla, and he's just kind of looking at her, and who is she? She's not my Sybil.
As you approach, interestingly enough, your sword, which is, well, where is the sword? Where do you keep? Okay, yeah. So maybe because the sword is good. Okay, so why don't we explain the mechanics behind the sword? So going forward, it'll be a little bit, it might make a little more sense. So the weapon, it replaces your packed weapon. It's a +2 packed weapon. All right, and it has a level 3 spell slot of the warlock list. And you could put level 1, level 2, up to a level 3 spell in it.
Now, is this only spells I know, or can I pick anything off the warlock list? As
Thought it was like a storage kind of one that you know.
Yeah, but at the same time,
it could
it's
come
not really
preloaded
him.
with one.
Right, at the same time, it's not really...
So does that mean...
No, I could... anything off the list up to 3rd level, I'll say. And
For the...
Is that...
That's already...
Sorry, is that fixed? Like,
it's
pick one?
You
Or
pick one and it's loaded in, and then let's say you can, every time you rest or something like that, you can ask your patron to fill it with a different spell. Because this is essentially what it is your patron is...
That's pretty badass.
Is granting you
badass.
the spell, right?
Right.
So it doesn't. Anything off the warlock list, it doesn't necessarily have to be one that you know, because you're not putting it in. You're asking your patron for it.
It's almost like a hearken to the
Delicious,
Shire.
by the way.
Which leads me to beg the question: who is Cappy's patron then, if not Sibylla?
Right. Yeah. Well,
Who's pulling the strings here?
The name of the sword that Sibylla wielded is Denoctrin. Over the course of 100 years, when Denoctrin and Sibylla merged during the when she had awakened the Krugean Sphere and activated it, and it exploded, her and Denoctrin merged and kind of became one at that point. And throughout the 100 years, Denoctrin took the form. Denoctrin can't talk, by the way. It's a sentient weapon, but it speaks in images. And you almost get a flood of this kind of information being now connected to this entity.
Do I just hear the words in my head when I touch it?
It's not... Denoctrin. Almost like an image, like it was written on a scroll or whatever. Yeah, it speaks to you and communicates through images.
So essentially, knowing everything in the connection with Sybil, while Sibylla and Denoctrin were united, Denoctrin knew what you'd want to know was where the fuck your wife was. So it showed you.
Exactly right. It was saying that you... Through those images, it was saying that you held up your end of the deal, and now it's showing you its end of the deal with reuniting you with your wife, and it showed you where your wife is. And essentially, if you want that fucking that scene dissected, is your wife is essentially, because of this soulmonger, is in like a limbo, like a waiting room almost, and over time, a soul gets fucking devoured, gone forever, and you don't know what, something's eating them, but you're not sure what, who, or why. But that's pretty much what this death curse is all about.
So the Sybil that we've grown to know and love, probably not get any visits from her in that incarnation.
No. Yeah, I mean, not necessarily. It could show him. Copernicus can see images,
Right.
And she can certainly present it can certainly present itself as a human woman, as it prefers to do. Not even an elven. The elven part came from Sibylla when they had melded. Denoctrin had always taken the form of a human woman prior to that, when communicating with Sibylla. But I don't think I don't know. I don't know how much Copernicus... You have a deep connection with this being, though. You have a pact, right? So I guess I'll leave that up to you, how much of that you want to, take with you or not.
I think he's very, very confused at this moment, because he's just hearing this name for the first time, and then he keeps looking at Sibylla. And it's just... Yeah, he feels like there's a connection between him and her, but it wasn't her. It was this other thing.
But it sort of was her. It's weird.
Right.
I'm curious. I wonder how much Sibylla looks like Sybil. I mean, we only saw like a shady figure, so I imagine we don't see a huge
I saw
But you saw her pretty clearly.
Right, like
so
the elf.
I'm interested to know, like, you know.
What's funny, Airmay, is I was actually going to ask what the resemblance was before Quincy walked up. And then I was like, there's probably too many people blocking the view now. So I didn't even bring it up.
Zavril's trying to see if he hates her. Do I hate her? What does she look like?
Does she look like undead? Yep. And that was the reconstruction of the Krugean Sphere.
Awesome to see it, like, probably on the floor now, just a mundane, everyday fucking object.
Yeah, well, where is the sphere? Did it disappear in the flash of light, or?
Yeah, what can we do with that?
It totally fell as, like, a useless hunk of shit onto the floor. That's what I imagined, like, loud. It, like, plunked onto the floor, and now it's just this...
Shattered into 6 pieces.
No, it certainly isn't useless. You know, it's still the Krugean Sphere, and it would still be there, I think. I suppose we could do something with that. Maybe, I'm thinking maybe
We'd
merchant
give it
princes are there.
Maybe a neat and her grandfather could protect it.
Right. I mean,
now that it's assembled, it's pretty big.
Right. And what was it before it was used by Sibylla?
Right. Well, it was the artifact that supposedly
transported an entire city, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it could only be activated by a beret, by a powerful. The beret. Did I go into the beret at all? Because I lost my notes and I wasn't sure how much of it. The beret were like these blessed guardians of Mesra. They were blessed by Uptau himself, and they were really the only ones strong enough, assumedly so, to actually use the Krugean Sphere. So,
fucking Uptau, like a shit dad. Like, just abandon everybody, but he's got a favorite.
Yeah, I mean, that's a mystery in and of itself, you know. And there's a lot of powerful shit happening in Schult, especially with the soulmonger, and especially the vision that Copernicus just saw. I mean, that's where, if you think about the level that exists on, it's not easy to distinguish if that's a higher level than Uptau or just below.
Yeah,
right.
It is weird because the spell plague just like moving things moved like between planes. So many things happened.
Yeah,
the ripples of it are still all over the place.
So as you move, so now that we distinguished what the weapon was, Copernicus, as you approached Master Triss, he kind of turns to you for a minute nervously. He almost expects the sword to be tied to you, you know? And there's clearly bad blood between Triss and that sword, or that sentient weapon. He says, Master Hart, I owe you much. Thank you for all that you have done.
Copernicus will, sensing the discomfort with him and the sword, will stash it away. Can I desummon it?
Yes. Yeah.
And it works.
You could desummon your pack weapon, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll embrace him. So I'm glad we made it through this.
Cappy hug.
A little bit of drow finger.
It's stinky, but it's nice.
He starts crying.
I picture his frame it's more slender than Copernicus expected.
Yeah, you're almost holding him up. He's so exhausted, but he does bring himself to his feet, which, if anything, shows you just how grateful he is. I mean, he's clearly exhausted, but he out of such a respect, brings himself to his feet to thank you. And he starts weeping. There's clearly a connection that he feels between you and Sibylla, and everything that's happening. There's definitely a connection there.
And then Cappy will reach down and grab Sibylla's hand and squeeze it, because for all these years he's known Sybil, he has never made physical contact with her, and just kind of reaffirm that she's here on this plane.
Yeah, it's just a limp hand, she's... And at this, Triss sits back down, and he motions to you, Quincy. he beckons you to come to come closer.
Quincy moves forward.
He says, I understand what all of this looks like and what you may think of it, but the thanks I have for all of you is extremely deep, and I promise I will do all I can to make things right and we will try to get to the bottom of this tomb of the 9 gods. As for Sibelia, and now he's looking to you, Copernicus, he says, I expected her state to be as such. It will not be an easy path, but in time we will have her back.
Yeah, he just kind of brushes some of the hair out of Sibelia's face.
Irame will come over and kind of give a nod.
Zavril is going to walk up and put his hand on Cappy's shoulder. Kind of in like a reassuring motion, stance.
There's your prey, Hunter. Nothing but a frail elven woman.
You're looking around, you're seeing these dark limbs still on the ground. I mean, Grandfather's a Tembi. He's exhausted too, but you see him looking around at his temple, and it's just trashed.
Poor guy.
There's like gray, jagged stones melded in with it's a mess.
Well, it was a good party. Hate to go so soon, but
We've got a death curse to take care of. Like, you guys got the pickup, or?
Temple of 9 gods and everything. Had the dumps open all day, though. The refuse pit.
You see one by one up in the balconies above, the merchant princes fade into the shadows. And that was 20 Hammer. We'll see you next time on the Natty 19 podcast.
All right, I'm glad that's
Holy shit
that's
sticks.
done.
I don't know if I should feel bad for Cappy or not.
No, I'm pretty
I
happy.
half expected him to think about summoning his wife instead.
Right? That went.
What I would have done.
That went. I had no idea how it was going to play out in the end.
Yeah, near the eye.
Went a lot deeper than I expected.
Like the way it's all shaping up.
Yeah, it's coming together.
You just like getting a magic weapon.
You know why?
Well, you know that.
why it had. You know why the Krugean Sphere had to be such like a big thing? Because we're all gonna like die in the next 2 episodes.
Right.
Right.
that was
Tie up the loose ends.
that was
Yeah,
that was
the
actually
closure.
just the end of the actual
That was
story.
it. That was the end of the tutorial.
We're all gonna die now.
Yeah.
Not Quincy, he ain't no fool.
Charlie's got his escape plan.
It's actually funny because I was willing to accept Quincy's death and almost wanted it on a couple of occasions.
Yeah.
But now I don't want Quincy to die.